Okay, so the way this is structured for the army is we have a list here. We're going to go just through core units, special units, rare units, then cap that off with heroes and lords. So let's start off with the core units because that's going to be, like we said before, you have the backbone of your vampire counts, and then they kind of use their necromancy to raise up a vast horde around them to go attack. And the core units are going to be your main fodder, your main meat shields. And I see here on my list I have that core units are going to be the zombies, skeleton warriors, crypt ghouls, and dire wolves. So what can you tell us about this first tier of units?
All right, well, let's start with the zombies because they're first up there. There's a lot of the core units for the vampire counts are kind of exactly what it says on the tin. The zombies, they're just rotting corpses that some vampire went, right, I need cannon fodder, you'll do. They're very much a tar pit unit. They will likely fill the role of you'll buy a ton of them just so you can throw them at the really effective enemy units, and they'll keep them tied up while your more effective guys chomp through their less effective fellows. The Skeleton Warriors, kind of the same deal. They are a bit more effective though because they actually get to use weapons as opposed to the zombies who just use their claws and their fingers. Skeleton warriors will be the bulk of your army. They will benefit a lot from having leadership in the form of vampires actually personally leading their units, because that will boost their combat ability, and also because those vampires will be able to, again, raise more people to join this unit, hopefully, if they keep that element of the tabletop gameplay in Total War, which will be interesting because I'd like them to, because there's a certain appeal to playing an army where you will literally get more powerful the more your enemy engages you, if that makes sense.
So the way this works on the tabletop is the more units you kill, you can then resurrect the corpses and they join your side.
It's kind of more abstracted than that. You can just use your magical powers that you've been assigned for each character to just raise up more people from what is essentially thin air. But in essence, yes, as you kill the enemy units, you are basically raising their dead comrades to kill them again. Direwolves, they are kind of good for just basically being faster moving, because the thing with zombies and skeleton warriors is they're not immensely tough, they're not immensely effective, and they're very slow because they're undead. So they move slower than their alive. What's the word I'm looking for?
Counterparts.
Counterparts. That's exactly the word I'm looking for, Oakley. Thank you. With the exception of maybe the dwarves, everything else will move faster than they will. So the dire wolves are a nice way to kind of counterbalance that, because you can send them out ahead of the rest of your army just to lock things down in combat. So your slower moving troops can move up and get stuck in tar pitting properly.
As we mentioned, core units, you're going to have a lot of zombies and skeletons roaming around. They're slow, they're large in number, so they're just there to tie down the enemy force, bog them down. The special units are going to start to be the ones who get your killing done. I'm just going to read off the list and then we'll dive into just a couple of these. So you have the Corpse Cart, Grave Guard, Black Knights, Hex Wraiths, Vargeists, Crypt Horrors, Bat Swarm, Fell Bats, and Spirit Hosts. So there's a bunch in here. So it looks like Grave Guards and Black Knights are more heavily armored infantry as opposed to zombies and skeletons that will fall apart. These guys can kind of hold their own in combat. And then they have kind of bigger beasts like these Fellbots, Crypt Horrors. It seems like this special units roster is supposed to be more beefy.
You're essentially right. Pretty much the thing with the vampire counts is that your special units and your rare units are basically slightly more effective, slightly more expensive, and slightly better armored versions of your basic units. So the Grave Guard are exactly what they sound like. They're skeleton warriors that are a bit better at their job. They do on the tabletop have a few nifty special rules. They're a lot more effective at killing things. The idea being that the Grave Guard are skeleton warriors who kind of remember who they were before they died, is basically the easiest way to put it. And so they're a lot more effective at their jobs. They generally form bodyguards for vampires going into battle on foot. Same kind of thing with the Black Knights. They're skeletal warriors who ride skeletal horses. And a lot of their appeal is that they're cheaper than their vampiric counterparts, which we'll get to when we go into rare units. The corpse cart, it's basically a buff unit. So it'll make your casting to increase the numbers in your zombie unit or your skeleton warrior units more effective, in essence. So it's kind of useful, but it's very situational. And that's one of the things that pops up a lot with the vampire counts is that they're an army that in situational, very, very situational circumstances can be excellent. The spirit hosts, I guess, would be a good thing to cover. The spirit hosts are basically, well, they're spirits that haven't been able to go to the proper place they're supposed to in the afterlife because a vampire has been around desecrating the local temples and graves and etc. etc. While he's raising his zombies and his skeleton warriors, he comes across some spirits that aren't quite moved over to the afterlife and goes, right, I'll be having you. You're quite good at killing things as well. Join me. Their main benefit is that they are, as spirits, not corporeal beings. So you need magical weapons to kill them, will probably be what comes up in the Total War title. I'm hoping, because they've already discussed that they will be using things like rune fangs for the Empire as like legendary weapons that you can pick up. I'm hoping that that means that other forces like the dwarves will have runic weapons, so they'll be able to hurt magical beings. But also, the vampires rely so heavily on magic. I'm hoping that it'll be included in some form. That's well, they're exactly what they say on the tin. I find that I'm going to be saying that a lot in this video.
Yeah.
That bats are just there to be skirmisher troops, essentially, because one of the things that viewers probably have noticed is that we haven't discussed a single ranged unit so far at all. I mean, maybe the corpse cart, if your ranged unit definition, it includes boosting the magic within a certain range. But other than that, we haven't discussed a single unit that can attack at range. And the bat swarms and the fell bats are kind of there to fill that gap. They don't have a ranged attack, but they are able to serve as skirmishers, if you will, just screening units. Shall we move on to crypt horrors, or did you have a question, Oakley?
No, I mean, just the idea of sending bat swarms around the battlefield seems kind of ridiculous. Um,
It does. It does a little bit, but it also sounds kind of interesting.
sure, and then the crypt horrors are what these guard the crypts of the vampire castles, I assume.
Yes, exactly. They generally hang out with Strigoi, so you can kind of get where the horrors thing comes in. They're very animalistic. They're not really alive as anything other than beasts, and they're generally really for a themed army. If you wanted to have like an entire army of Strigoi on the tabletop, you would probably field a couple of units of Crypt Horrors, and you'd therefore have a couple of units of Crypt Ghouls to be your core units, etc., etc. It's a lot to do with the thematic feel that you want for your army. Other than that, they're kind of run of the mill units. They don't really have anything special about them, except that their attacks cause poison damage and they can regenerate their lost wounds. In the Total War title, I'm hoping that Crypt Horrors will be one of the ultimate tar pits because they will replenish their own damage over time while they're stuck in fighting whoever it is that you threw them against. But again, we can't know anything until CA decides to go, hey guys, this is what we're doing with vampires. I forgot, we did not talk about Vargeists, which are they're kind of important. But they're basically what bestial vampires would look like, and they're flying units, so they're fast response stuff.
So now I guess we'll move on to the rare units. So these guys are going to be even more veteraned up and armored and deadly. So the list I have here is the Vargulf, Blood Knights, Black Coach, Terrorgeist, Mortis Engine, and Cairn Wraith. Yeah, so let's you said the Blood Knights are just more heavily upgraded Black Knights essentially, right?
Kind of. The Blood Knights are actual vampires,
Ah,
which yeah, I know, right? Which makes them
all the
immediately
difference.
more desirable. So they are basically your elite cavalry. So the Black Knights are kind of your go-to. I need a cavalry force. The Blood Knights are the guys that you get to take on the really heavy stuff that's coming at you. You go right. I need a charge that's going to be effective. It's going to work. It's going to kill something. So Black Knights have their use, but Blood Knights are thematically they're blood dragons because they're elite warriors. They have a special ability on the tabletop called Frenzy, which, well, it's kind of self-explanatory. It just means they get really, really mad and they punch shit in the face and it really hurts. So they're your go-to guys when you need to break a line. Vargulfs are kind of important. Again, they're just kind of an upgraded version of Vargeists, but their deal is like a Vargeist. It's an animalistic vampire. It's not a vampire per se, but for the purposes of the tabletop game, it counts as a vampire. So it doesn't suffer from the slow movement or the need to rely on a vampire to keep it alive if the general happens to die. These things are ravening animals, even more than Strigoi vampires are animals. Like, Strigoi seems civilized next to these fellas.
And what's the Black Coach?
The Black Coach, I'm glad you asked what the Black Coach is. So, it's got a guy who's essentially a Grim Reaper driving it everywhere. And it kind of just says, like, it's a transport essentially. And it's thematically it's supposed to be used when a vampire gets struck down on the battlefield and you load them up and you send them back home so that they can rest in the crypt and then come back and kill things again. As the Vargulf and the Blood Knights, etc., were upgrades for their respective special units, the Terrorgeist is essentially an upgrade to the Bat Swarm and the Fellbats. But their deal is that they can go forth and they cause, like most of the units in the Vampire Counts list, terror. So the Vampire Counts are an army that very much relies upon scaring the bejesus out of whoever it is they're fighting. And the Terrorgeist is basically your first frontline guy to do that. Because it will move faster than your foot troops, you kind of send it ahead to just cause terror to be affecting everybody. And I imagine that its role in a Total War game will be just that, to spearhead. And so it will shake the morale of everything in front of you, and then your line hits. And hopefully, if you're really lucky, everything shatters in front of you and you just run it down. So Terrorgeists have the potential to be really cool because flying units are now a thing, and Terrorgeists being bats, well, you can figure that one out.
And then the Cairn Wraiths as well are pretty awesome. Meaty infantry.
I think they're pretty good. Their whole deal is that they're wraiths. They are also ethereal. So they are essentially what you throw them into a gap in the line where you know there are no magic weapons because they will tar pit forever and they will be able to hopefully break through that line eventually. So Khan Wraiths, they're not really overly special, if that kind of makes sense. I know they're in the rare unit section, but they're kind of just for flavor, which is unfortunate because on the tabletop that has so much potential and they look cool. Because you can make anything into a Khan Wraith if you want to, if you really want to convert models. And I'm hoping that they carry that flavor over into Total War.
Yeah, let's touch on the Mortis engine real quick. Just give me a quick overview of what this guy is, or thing is.
Alrighty. So, like the Corpse Card, it's a buffing unit, and like the Black Coach, again, buffing unit. This one does buff magic, and it's kind of like a chariot, but it's basically a relic of vampire kind that buffs the magical users around it. Seeing as we have to touch on it quickly, but it's kind of cool. It's again very thematic though.
Cool. Yeah. So all of these you have one fodder units to slow the enemy down. Then you have select special units that you then have to apply on an enemy that's presumably been frozen. So either you break their morale or you attack them when they can't retaliate using wraiths and spirit hosts, or you just have stuff that shatters their morale like the terror guy. So very interesting army composition. Let's touch briefly on the main lords that we'll be seeing on the battlefield. We've done the bloodlines. Let's go over the main lords. So I have here probably we're going to see Vlad von Karstein and Count Manfred.
We may see Vlad. Vlad is technically at the time the game is set dead, like dead for real dead. He is the progenitor of the von Carstein line. He is the guy who became an elector count back in the day of the province of Sylvania and led an invasion to try and take over the empire, which was foiled when the Grand Priest of Sigmar tackled him off a wall and impaled him on stakes. So he's pretty interesting. He's pretty cool. For those, uh, this is just going to be a moment of shameless plugging. I'm sorry, Oakley. For those of you who hear about these characters and wish a more in-depth look, Arch and I have both done videos where we touched on the special characters. So, for the sake of this video, we're going to be very, very brief about who is who. But if you want to know more, insert Starship Troopers reference. If you'd like to know more, click the links going to our respective channels. So, shall we move on to Count Manfred because he's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, let's do it.
He's amazing. So Manfred von Carstein is the guy that we saw in the trailer for Warhammer Total War when it was first announced. He's the guy on the massive zombie dragon. So he's going to be really cool. He is at the present time in the timeline the leader of all the vampire counts in Sylvania. I guess kind of de facto the leader of all vampire counts everywhere, but nobody else really kind of respects his authority. They're just kind of like, yeah, whatever. If you want to lead, if you want to say you're leading, go nuts. We don't care. But he's a powerful force on the battlefield because he is a sorcerer, like of amazing power, as well as a fairly formidable warrior. So hopefully he lives up to the laws hyping him up. He's very interesting.
Well, cool. So I think, as you said, for more details, see both Grey Hunter's channel and Arch Warhammer's channel. Otherwise, I hope these videos have given you an impression of what to expect. So again, to recap, these guys perform very much like a swarm army that wants to get in up close and personal, bog you down, and then kill you with 1,000 cuts, presumably, with specialized targeted cuts using specialized units. The core of every army is going to be the vampire heroes and lords who kind of or literally hold the entire army together. Without them, the rest of the army collapses. So very interesting force. I'm looking forward to seeing how these guys play on the battlefield, what compromises they've been forced to make from going to the tabletop to the video game itself. But yeah, I think CA has held these guys back to be the last of the main factions revealed because they are probably the most interesting. So yeah, I'm excited to see more about these guys. It's perfect timing. So I expect to see this up pretty soon. Anyways, we hope you guys enjoyed. Stay tuned for more. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.